Russ, in trying to understand the nature of the human mind and consciousness, one must deal with those people who claim a very deep understanding of themselves and their inner experience, so-called enlightenment, transcendental meditation, and all things in that area. And some have tried to study that scientifically. From your work on studying inner experience, have you worked with those either professional yogas who do this to an extreme degree, or people who've begun meditation, and how has that affected their inner experience?
Well, I have sampled with, I think, 3 or 4 adept, what I'm led to believe is adept yogis. I'm not one myself, and so I'm not claiming any specific knowledge about that. What I have found in common across those folks is that their inner experience is populated by what I've called sensory awareness. And sensory awareness is that phenomenon that's paying attention to some specific aspect of the world. It's not just seeing your face; it's seeing the color of your eyes, for example, and making that sort of the focal point. And so I would say that is by far the most frequent characteristic. Like maybe there's nothing else going on in their experience. So I have not sampled with them while they're meditating. I've sampled with them while they are going through.
Well, that's consistent, because they talk about this mindfulness, where you're hyper aware of your environment, and that's, you're not interacting with it, you're not judgmental, but you're constantly aware, at least in the meditative state. But what you're saying is that in their normal life, that they have taken that and applied it as well.
I think that's exactly correct. So, and I don't know whether they started out that way or whether they trained themselves to be that way. I have sampled with some people, quite a few actually, people who are not yogis, who have a lot of this sensory awareness stuff, and it's not always healthy for them. So I think of it as something like a razor's edge kind of a deal. The problem with sensory awareness is that it makes you very tightly tied to the environment, and if the environment goes bad, then you go bad, and you don't plan well. If you're very well balanced and you're not planning well, that's probably a really good deal. But if you're somewhat disturbed and you're not planning well, that can get you into trouble.
On the yogis, we've now said that acute sensory awareness in their normal day-to-day activity is a prime characteristic. So that being true, what do they not do that normal populations would do? What are they missing out of their lives, which is being replaced by this hypersensitivity to sensory perception?
Well, they don't have much else other than sensory awareness, is what I found. So they don't have something like inner speaking, and there is in that literature the attempt to diminish self-talk, and so they are successful at that, as far as I've been able to talk.
So that means that they don't. And how do you characterize inner speaking that they don't have? What is?
Well, typical inner speaking is I was saying to myself, well, I think I'll have a ham sandwich. And
you literally use words to yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you self-vocalize it, or?
The typical person who uses inner speaking does so, and will report this is exactly as if I was speaking out loud, except no words are coming out. But the words are just as specific, and they come one after another, and they have inflection. And if I stutter in my inner speaking, and I pause for a comma and inflect upwards for a question mark. If I'm angry, I sound angry.
And this is talking to themselves, and they know they're talking to themselves. It's a very natural thing. And most people do this?
Many people do this. I would say if you randomly sampled the entire population, a quarter of all the time, maybe a quarter of the samples would involve inner speaking to some degree. Some people innerly speak all the time. Other people innerly speak never. Quite a few people do so frequently, but not in their extreme.
Yogis who have supposedly a deep sense of enlightenment, or closer to this ideal, would have very low inner verbalization.
Lower zero.
Lower zero, very high sensory awareness. How about other characteristics?
Well, Mostly, there are no other characteristics that in the few that I have sampled.
So what's a sensory? What is an example of a sensory perception that a yogi would have, not in his or her meditation process?
Well, if I were a yogi, which I'm not, but if I were and we were having this conversation, I might be paying attention to the particular maroon color of your shirt.
Very aware of that.
I would be processing what you're saying, and I would give a cogent answer to that. But instead of paying direct, conscious, before the footlights of consciousness attention to your words, I'd be interested in the color or the folds or whatever of your shirt.
And what are the implications of that in terms of understanding the whole mental process of a yogi in the training? What would you say?
Well, I think some yogis do try to enhance sensory awareness, and I think those yogis probably are successful. So when they claim that they're attending to sensory things, I'm guessing that's probably absolutely correct. And I would say that sensory awareness among people who are not yogis is very often, people are reluctant to report about that. So if you're a normal person and you've got a lot of sensory awareness, which is quite possible. I don't know about you personally, but it's quite possible.
Very low.
On our first day of sampling, you would probably not tell me anything about your sensory awareness because you were bashful about it, I guess. And the second day, then you'd say, well, there was something else, and I would ask you what, and you'd sort of shy away from it. And the third sampling day, then you'd start telling me about the sensory aspects of your experience. And I'm guessing that's because sensory and sexual and sensual are very close together, and people are quite shy about talking about that. But that's not true for the yogis. The yogis recognize that if this is part of my experience, and you ask me about my experience, my job was to tell you about my experience, and that's what it is. That's what I'll tell you.